Hi, I'm Cheryl Kasper. I'm an opal cutter and carver, and I teach at the William Holland School of Lapidary Arts in Young Harris, Georgia. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes today about opal carving. When most people think about opal carving, they imagine artistic shapes, such as flowers or birds and such. The valuable color play is often surfaced as the stone is carved, but on some occasions, the color play is sacrificed for the sake of the shape. We typically see this type of carving made from larger pieces of opal with a white base, often from Coober Pedy, Australia. If the color play is not very bright in a piece of rough, then it might make a nice palette for someone to impose their artistic design on that piece. My specialty is carving opal from Lightning Ridge, Australia, home to some of the most precious opal with a black base. This opal can be worth far more per carat than an opal with a lighter base, even if the color play is just as bright. So here's a key point to remember. In general, the goal of working with opal is to maximize the value of the stone by exposing the most and best color and retaining as much as possible of the weight. So let's talk about color for just a minute, color bars and color play, because they play a huge role in what stones we carve and how we carve them. Typically, in precious opal, color bars form in a pretty straight line, which makes it relatively easy to cut opal in a traditional dome. Much of the precious opal in Lightning Ridge formed in straight color bars, like it did in other areas with precious opal. So, for a while the earth was stable enough to create a color bar, which is all about molecules of silica, aligning, and so forth, which we won't go into here. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. Lightning Ridge is on a fault line. So the earth started to shift around, taking the opal with it, morphing the color bars into all sorts of interesting and irregular patterns, which I absolutely love. But the question is, how do you cut this irregular material? Certainly you can treat it as a picture stone and basically cabochon it into a dome, but remember, much of this rough has a dark base and could be pretty valuable. So to cut this irregular material into a cabochon would mean to cut away part of their valuable color play. To keep from missing out on these unique, wonderful stones, people in Lightning Ridge determined methods to carve these opals and reveal the incredible color play. In carving Lightning Ridge opal, the focus is on finding what the stone has to offer first, before determining what the final shape will be. As you can imagine, many of the carvings from this philosophy end up being very abstract in the final product. Some might take on a recognizable shape in the end product, but only after first removing the problems and exposing the best color play. So that was a really quick overview of opals and opal carving, skipping just a whole bunch of stuff. But that's okay, as I'd really like to get into a demonstration of carving precious opal. So let's get started with that. Before we start carving, we need to gather the tools and materials we'll work with. Let's begin with the carving machine. There are many different tools that you can use, but for this demonstration, I'm going to be using the Marathon Champion 3. It's in the category of a micromotor, and you can buy them on Amazon for $100 to $150. Be careful when you buy them, just to make sure that they work, and also that it's got the right plug for your environment. I prefer it over a Fordham or a Dremel because it's more flexible and easier on my wrist if I'm carving all day, which sometimes I do. It's smooth and quiet and very easy to use. But it does have the limitation of requiring a 3/32 bit size, unless I use an adapter, which I have for smaller bits. At my workstation, I also have a good light, a towel, and some sort of magnification for my eyes. And this might seem odd, but I like to work in a pet bowl, thanks to the recommendation of my friend Andrew Kemney from Down to Earth Opals in Lightning Ridge. These bowls have a side that will keep the bowl from tipping over if I lean on the side of it, which I have a tendency to do with my wrist. I put a sponge in the bowl of water about halfway up the sponge. This way, I can keep my carving surface wet without splashing water everywhere. I also like to use a lot of different brushes to clean the surface of the carving as I work. Toothbrushes are fine. I also like to use a stiffer hair coloring brush from Sally's Beauty Supply or somewhere like that. Mascara brushes and smaller dental brushes are helpful for cleaning very small areas. Here are some of the bits that I like to use with my opal carving. My Marathon, like I said, uses a 3/32 bit size. We'll start with metal bits, and then work our way to softer, more flexible bits, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. So here's a brief overview of the opal carving process.
First, we need to pick a stone to carve. We'll analyze it to make sure that it's a good candidate to carve. Next, we'll remove the problems like sand and cracks. Then, we'll create a sense of shape and flow that is aesthetically pleasing to the carving. Then, we'll smooth and blend the surface to remove irregularities. And finally, we'll polish the stone. Ready? Good. Me too.
Step 1. Pick a stone to carve. Don't pick one that you could easily cut or cabochon into a dome. Remember, it takes 10 times or longer to carve than to cut. So I start all of my stones on a pixie or other cabochon machine to help me see into the stone better. There are all sorts of clues to look for as you cut, but the main rule is if you start to cut away color to remove a problem, stop immediately because you don't have the right tool. The stone has reached its limits of what a big tool can do to uncover the color. We need to go to a smaller option, just like going to a smaller paintbrush if I'm painting a portrait. These are the stones I put aside to carve.
So this is a particularly good stone to carve. It is an example of Lightning Ridge, and you'll notice here that it's got a nice color bar, and it's in a nice dark gray tone. But you see it's got some irregularity in the color bar. It's actually sort of a wavy or undulated bar here. So this is going to be a good candidate to carve. What I don't know is what's going on in the back. The reason why that's important is because I don't know if this should be the top or this should be the top. When I first looked on the back, I couldn't tell anything. There was no color at all on the back. So what I did, I carved down until I saw a little bit of color play. That color play I circled right here in a Sharpie. So that is the location of my color. So I'm going to continue carving this a little bit to see if I can get some more information before I actually decide which is the top and which is the bottom. But there is one phenomenon that I wanted to point out to you here. You'll notice here that this part of the stone is gray. But when I started opening up the stone on the back, you can see immediately that I started uncovering a darker black. This was all covered in that gray when I started all the way across here. And it's very typical of Lightning Ridge material that's in the rough. So that is what I call skin. If we were to uncover further down here in this stone, we would see additional blackness starting to arise. So this is carving for the sake of information gathering.
You know, I think I've decided to use this stone for our carving demo. I like the wavy lines in it, and it will be a good example. It doesn't have a lot of sand pits, which is another challenge that we commonly face, but for now, this looks like a great stone. Remember, the key to picking a stone to carve is this. If you can cabochon a stone and maximize the most and best color, then don't carve it. As you cut Lightning Ridge, there will be stones you just don't know what to do with. But if you start to cut away color to deal with problems, it might be a good candidate for a carving. Put it aside and deal with it as you learn more. To start with, look for attributes like these. Wavy color bars that aren't parallel with each other, and bright color with sand pits all around. You know, in each of these situations, you wouldn't be able to make a good cabochon, would you? So put it aside until you're ready to start carving. The second step is to remove all of the problems. That includes sand and cracks, or any other problem that gets in the way of the color play.
I've got my micromotor on, I've got my sponge, which is about halfway up with water, and I'm dipping that as I go so that I will keep that stone wet as I cut. The coarser the grit on your bit, the more quickly the stone will dry as you're working it, and you'll start to see a white powder form if it's not wet enough. Additionally, you'll see that there's some sand pits in here. I'll probably want to start carving those out as well. I can use a smaller tool, or I can also use something like a pick, like this. You can see how that's starting to get that out. Or we can also use something like this, which is a handmade bit. And I can use this handmade bit, which I'll tell you about a little bit later, to get in here and get some of this out. So I'm going to keep working here, and I'll talk to you in just a minute. This is a centered bit, which means that it has grit that goes all the way through, or at least very deeply into the core of this, and it's diamond, so it's going to last a lot longer. It's also a lot more expensive, so you need to be very careful with your centered bits, and they will work well for you. This is a very low grit, very coarse grit, and that's why it works so well on some of these edges. But you'll notice that I'm working very carefully as I go through those edges, because I don't want to chip. So this would also be a good time potentially to go to a finer grit, and that would keep from chipping some of these areas as I work. Or just be extremely careful, and that'll work for you. There it is. Do you see what I see? Right, black right here. Do you see how I opened up that black in that part of the stone? That's really important. Why is that important? Because black is more valuable than gray as a base. So anytime that we get past that skin into that black tone, that means more money for our piece when we're finished. And also, I think a prettier piece. I think it looks prettier over black than it does. Can you see how that kind of emerged right here, this black? So we're getting past that skin. We got a little more skin right here to go, a little more skin in various places here. I'm curious to see if there's going to be a blacker piece under here, and then also up in here. So let's keep working that, and I'll see you soon. I want to be very careful as I work this part right here, because that's color play, isn't it? So I don't want to carve that off, but I need to get enough information to find out if there's going to be black underneath here to help me decide if I want this to be my top or if I want this to be my top. So you'll notice as I work this particular piece, what I've done so far is essentially start my girdle, right? This type of girdling, so to speak, some way to kind of get in and look at that stone, but it's a very gentle process, and you'll notice I'm working the whole stone at one time as I'm trying to get more information. This is the side where I have more information. So this is the side where I need more information, right? So I'm going to cut down in there, and I've got a little bit of information right here where I see that touch of green coming through there. So that's what I'm working on here. Where does this color play come out over here? Well, we're starting to get a kind of good idea, but we also know that it's wavy, and with Lightning Ridge, we're not sure about anything, are we? So let's keep working this piece. Great, welcome back. So I've been working on this particular stone that we saw, and I've been carving around the sides to continue my investigation, keeping in mind that Lightning Ridge doesn't have to follow any rules. Now, what that means is that the color bar can show up anywhere. You can have two color bars, you can have color bars that show up halfway. So here's what I found. Right here, as I work around, trying to connect where that color play went in, and I see a nice area of color play, a nice strong color bar, but it kind of stops right here, and you can see where I dipped in here trying to find where that color bar continues, but I really don't know where it's going to go, so we're going to have to keep our eye on that. So I also tried from the other side. You follow that big color bar around there and kind of come around here, and it gets real narrow. And I don't actually see color play right here, but I see the narrowest little color change in the potch. Now that's an interesting characteristic because it tells me that there might be something there. So I follow it on around and I pick up my color bar right here, right where that line continues. I pick that green color bar up right here, and it's right at the top. Now who knows where this big color bar is going to end, but we're going to try to surface the top down to here, choosing this as our top, right? And the top down right on the top of there, right where that color play is. Now, it might seem like I'm cutting away a lot of this stone. And if you're not used to cutting Lightning Ridge, you might be surprised by this. But the more you can see of your color bar from the very beginning, the less you're going to have to cut away material in order to finish your stone, or to get a good color bar on the surface across the whole top. But in general, if you're working with rough, you should remember a general rule of thumb is that you're going to cut away 4/5 of your stone in order to get your final stone. So that might seem like a lot, but remember the goal is to maximize the color play so that you can maximize the value of the stone. Again, I'm not trying to cut away all of that potch, because part of that potch might be part of the story of the stone. So let me show you what I mean by that. Take a look at this stone. It's a little different, isn't it? But you can see where that black is, But there are times when you will find carvings that embrace the potch on the top when you anticipate that there's no color play underneath that potch. So, and especially with something that's as black as that, and you can see that's a really black stone, isn't it? That some of that black helps it to identify as Lightning Ridge, and some of it is kind of interesting. So you might like that as a characteristic there. For me, I think it's kind of disturbing right there in the middle of this stone, but I might choose to leave it as I continue working this. But this is how black can be part of the story, or the potch can be part of the character of the finished piece. It's okay to do that. Yes, it does detract from the total value, and if I had color play under there, I'd probably try to get that black off. But that's what I mean by that.
You can use a light to help you see inside the stone. For example, from the top, the stone looks like this. But using a light as a backlight can reveal a lot about what's inside the stone, such as how far the potch goes down and how deep the sand pits might be. This can help you make decisions about how to proceed with your carving.
Here's something else to remember, is that you see here I've started to get some dust on the side of my bowl, and it's on the side of my lamp, and it's dusty, and it does get everywhere. Even if you're working right here in the middle of water, you can see how much material I have floating around in that water. I'll definitely want to change this water before I start getting into a finer grit, so that I don't contaminate any of my wheels, or certainly not my polish. And you might also consider whether or not you want to wear a mask. Just know that's floating around, and you should be careful with your health. Okay, so I'm going to start now working here. We see that little green color bar right here of the stone, but coming from the top, I'll be able to see when I hit color, won't I? And then very gently over here, where this color bar here is so very close to the surface of this part, I'll start gently working down this part of the stone, calling this my top. See you in a few minutes.
Here, I'm using a 120 grit centered bit to remove the bulk of the material over the color bar, being very careful not to get too close to color. So I'm going to fast forward through a lot of this cutting, but the main idea is that you're removing material to get down to color, wherever that color is located.
Good. So you can see as I'm working this stone, this undulation of this color bar right here. This is such a great example of how that material is sort of irregular and wavy. That color bar is wavy. So I've come along here and gotten very close to that color bar. I can definitely see this color. Can you see that green right in here? Yeah. and I can see some green down in here. I'm very close to it over here, right to that color bar, but that's so thin that I want to be careful. I'm going to go down to a smaller grit as I move forward now. And if I do that, I need to change this water, don't I? And so I'm going to come on around here. You can see how I've kind of gotten that little bevel into my color all the way around. Again, that's what we call cutting to color. And it simply means that you're letting the color that you see give you hints about moving forward in your carving, because this color bar isn't in an oval, is it? So why would we cut it in an oval? Why would we lose that color play? So we're letting the color dictate our decisions and what we're going to do with this. We have no idea what the shape is going to be, but we're letting the color tell us what we want to know in order to maximize its color play and its ultimate value. That's what we mean by the Lightning Ridge cutting method, is paying attention to that irregularity.
Step 3. Creating the shape and flow. When you've gotten rid of all of the problems and have a good idea where your color is, you probably have a surface that looks like moon craters. The next step is to find a way to do these things. First, tie together all of the low points and make the shape aesthetically pleasing, following the stone's attributes and uniqueness. Reveal as much color play as possible, and maintain structural integrity. Physically, in this step, I take a metal bit, usually starting out with something rounded, and connect the areas that are lower. I like to hold my bit against the stone at an angle and drag it from place to place. I never push the bit forward, as that creates a bumpy channel rather than a smooth channel. I often round the edges of the channel to avoid sharp edges.
So I've moved on just a little bit, and there are a couple of points I wanted to bring up to you. First of all, when you have a very small stone, you can use a dop stick to help you hold on to it if you want to, but you don't have to. So I'm leaving this alone right now, just to kind of help me hold on to it. The next question that you might have is which bit to use. You noticed I started with a relatively large bit when I was using a coarse this bit to help me investigate what I had here. This is a centered bit, as we talked about earlier, but I was using it to help me kind of remove material quickly. The more coarse the grit, the bigger the bit I want to use. I don't want to use a very small bit like this. This is a needle nose bit that you can see here. And it's pretty coarse. I'm going to save this and use it for something very special later on. But this kind of removal of material here, I want to stay with a larger bit as I work on a larger portion of the stone. I don't have a lot of detail right now, so there's no reason for me to go to a very fine bit like this. I'll just create irregularities I'll have to smooth out. So the larger the surface area that you're working on, the larger the bit. And you want for the bit that you choose to kind of follow the shape that you're trying to clean out. So for example, right in here, I'm trying to clean out a relatively large area, and I want a bit that will fit pretty well in there. I want a pretty flat side. I don't really want an edge to it. So I'm going to use this kind of a bullet shape. As I get closer to my color, you notice I've got my color play right here. It's starting to come through, isn't it? But I've moved down to a 325 centered bullet bit in order to start getting closer to that color. I don't want for this sharp, coarse grit of this bit to get anywhere near that color, because I'll have to cut away color to get rid of these scratches that I'll make with this. So the closer I get to color, the finer grit I want to use. So I might even go to a 600 bullet just to get down very close. I don't want to waste any more of that color than I have to in order to get there. It's starting to smooth out some with that 325, and that 600 will even do better.
You can tell here that I'm starting to reveal a whole lot more color as I work. So I've moved to a 600 grit needle bit for the very last small areas of potch that are over color. By being careful this way, I'm able to find all of my color, but I'm careful not to use the tip of this sharp needle bit because it will gouge. Once you start to like the way your stone is flowing, you're almost ready for the next step. It's time to stop and move on from metal bits before you get totally finished with your flow. Remember, you have to blend and polish every part of your carving with every grit, which is one reason why it takes so long. So leave yourself some stone to work with in each of these passes. Be careful not to overcut with more aggressive grits, or you'll have to cut away color just to remove scratches and finish your polish. Step 4. This is where we blend and smooth the surface after we've created our flow. We have a sense of movement in our carving and feel that it's taking on a pleasing shape. We're ready to blend the surface of our carving. This is where flexibility becomes important. In this step, I use bits that have some flexibility, such as Nova points and sandpaper bits. I'm carefully working my way from the edge where I see color to the inside area where I still need to reveal more color. And with patience and time, we're starting to reveal some more color play. I personally found the need for more choices in this category to help me with detailed work. So I make my own bits like these with grit on balsa wood or solid grit made out of epoxy. I usually start with about 325. This is okay if you don't press very hard. Sometimes I think there might be some color hiding out underneath a little bit of potch, so I'll go back to a metal bit and refine the shape as I need to. This is a 600 centered bit, and it's important not to go to too coarse of a grit when you're trying to refine your shape here, as you'll introduce new, very deep scratches. Because the bit is flexible, it's contouring to the shape a little bit and smoothing the irregularities. This is the step where I notice the greatest difference in my piece. It definitely takes the most time, so don't rush this step. Do every surface of the carving with every grit, carefully, making sure that you've gotten rid of the scratches before you go to the next level of grit. Here, you can see some of the bits that I've made by hand. These are diamond powder and epoxy, specifically 330 epoxy, mixed to about peanut butter consistency, rolled out, and then let to dry. I make sanding sticks for each grit that I use, so that I can blend using each one for my detailed areas throughout my carving. Step 5. Polishing your carving. Everyone has their own preferences for polish, like Holy Cow, or Zam, or Lapsa. So you use whatever you like the best. But I like to use a wax polish. Once I get to about 3,000 with my flexible bits, I switch over to Super Polish, a water-based diamond polish from Mountain Mist Products. It's a little pricey, but a little goes a long way, and it gives the best final polish I've found so far for opal. I created a baggie for each grit, starting with about 1,200, 3,000, 14,000, and 50,000. And I keep all of my related bits and products in that baggie. That helps with contamination. Here's a technique you might like. No matter what step I'm on, I like to brace my hands against each other in some way to stabilize my work. This is especially helpful if your hands are shaky or if you're doing very detailed work. I'll work through each grid using the various bits that I've dedicated to this particular grid. I even use Q-tips without the cotton, and toothpicks or bamboo skewers for polishing very small areas. Before I move on to the next grid, I'll brush off my stone with water. Finally, I'll end up with the 50,000 wax polish. And it looks wonderful, doesn't it?
So that's opal carving in a nutshell. I know it was brief, but hopefully it gave you enough information to find out if it's something you'd like to try. Remember to look in your Lightning Ridge material for irregularities in the color bar so that you listen to the stone. And so what that means is very simply to analyze it, to find out where those color bars go, and to determine how best to maximize that color play as you reveal the hidden beauty inside of the stone. And this will surface as you continue to work the stone. So you might change your mind several times about how you want it to display in the finished piece. That's okay. So the process doesn't have to be truly continual. Sometimes I go back and forth a lot as I learn new information about the stone. But the main thing is, be patient, blend it well, and give it a good polish. And have fun. So thanks for joining us today. Happy carving!